He's almost giving us headlines every second. I've told this many times earlier, but it's worth repeating. Every second we have a new headline at our Ymedia breaking news ticker, the red ticker that you see at the bottom on both our channels actually. And I'm sure most of you know by this time we have two channels, Channel Y, which is broadcasted on Rogers 857, Bell 828, Telus 2418, Ignite 707, and Y Plus, our 24/7 all English channel. You can access these channels on an app as well, so make sure you download our app, Ymedia. But our red ticker is busier than ever. Ymedia Foreign Policy Report, that will be the topic today. We'll definitely talk about Trump. He's actually shaken up the geopolitical situation from Canada to Mexico to Europe, Russia-Ukraine war, Vladimir Zelensky, the recent spat that they have, so many other things to talk about from Asia. President Xi Jinping, where is he in his whole bigger scenario? China-US relationship, India-US relationship. So we'll talk all about that today. And how does this impact Mexico, Canada, Europe, Russia, Ukraine, India, Pakistan, Middle East? He's spoken a lot about Middle East as well. So there's lots to talk on today's show. So welcome to Ymedia podcast once again. We have our own very special host, guest, and she leads from the front as far as Ymedia Newsroom is concerned. A very popular show on Channel Y. Harmona ji, a warm welcome.
Thank you so much. It's always great to be here.
Yeah, it's always great to have you. You know, we try to cover so much. And you know, it's always fun to talk the political discussion, Ymedia Political Sensex with you. But here we are going to discuss Ymedia Foreign Policy with you. And you have a very good experience. You've lived in Europe, you've lived in US, and you've lived in Canada as well. And you've spent a good lot of time in Asia as well.
Yeah, I was born in Asia. Yeah, I've lived first decade of my life in Asia. Yeah, I think as I was listening to you talk about President Trump and all his touch points in the last 5 weeks and every continent. The only continent he hasn't really done anything about now is so far South America and I think Australia. So
South America he has because Colombia
and Panama, right?
Colombian president,
yeah.
Australia he hasn't done much on that side, but definitely these tariffs are going to affect Australia as well and Africa as well. But if you really want to exclude a continent which may not have that much of an impact, that could be Africa.
Well, no, he's already started on his talks about of South America. South Africa. South Africa. Yeah.
South Africa, but overall Africa. You know, when you talk of as a continent, not much of an impact. I think because of
there's Egypt's Africa. We forget Egypt's part of the Middle East, but it's really an African country. I mean, really, his touch points in about 5 weeks have really so much has happened.
So much has happened. Yeah, you're right. You know, and it's hard to actually keep up. You know, but but we'll try to do this at Ymedia Podcast. One of the reasons that when we started this Ymedia Podcast was this. Because there's so much to talk and then so much to discuss. It's very difficult on our regular shows that we have Ymedia Political Sensex, Ymedia Foreign Policy Report. We can barely squeeze in the headlines and a bit of analysis. The podcast at Ymedia, it's meant to discuss in detail. So today it'll be mainly Trump card. Even thought of a show, Trump card. That's basically only on Trump. But most of the discussion that we're going to do today will be surrounded. Will be around Donald Trump, President Trump. So where do we start? I think why don't we start with Ukraine-Russia conflict. It's almost been more than 3 years. 2022, February, there was a time this conflict started. And more than 3 years now, Russia-Ukraine conflict and Vladimir Zelensky coming to US. I think among so many other policies which has changed, but this is a U-turn. It's a diametrically opposite policy by the US now. So we'll start with this one first, because if we talk about this policy, US, whether it was Republicans or Democrats, they both sided Ukraine. Europe, they all sided with Ukraine. Canada, they sided with Ukraine. Actually, I used to get questioned that, Yudhvir, you know a lot about Asia and in particular India as well. Why is India supporting Russia? Why is India not on the side of Ukraine? And I had to give a bit of explanation because not that I'm from India originally, but because as a journalist I know a lot about that, and I would tell them, India has very strong ties with Russia. Historically, they've been together. There are strong military ties as well. The friendship together as well. Russia has supported India in many of the conflicts with Pakistan, and also Russia did support Ukraine as well. They gave them aid, and Ukraine's leaders have visited India. So it's not that India didn't support. Yes, India didn't take any sides in particular. But coming back on Volodymyr Zelensky, we'll talk about that as well, and we'll also talk about Canada-US relationship, especially when now US President Donald Trump, he's also made comments against Pierre Poilievre. He had already made comments against Chrystia Freeland, Justin Trudeau, but he's also made comments for Pierre Poilievre, and Pierre Poilievre has retaliated. We'll talk about that, what happened there. And Jagmeet Singh, he's all up against Trump. He also wanted Trump, his visit cancelled here at the G7 summit. Trudeau didn't like that idea. We'll talk all about that. But where do we start? Let's start from Volodymyr Zelensky. But I'm going to show you a video. But all this, what is happening, I want you to take a couple of minutes and talk a little bit about Trump and the way he's shaken up geopolitical situation. And then we'll go right into that Volodymyr Zelensky and Donald Trump video.
Yeah, so when it comes to the war with Russia and Ukraine, essentially we saw the shift in the policy when U.S. met with Russian officials, right? Essentially, it was the phone call between the two presidents, Putin and Trump, and then their foreign affairs ministers, and they met in where'd they meet? They met in Saudi Arabia. And they had their discussions, and it was a closed-door meeting where President Zelensky was not invited at, and NATO was thinking, what's happening? Because you have, Secretary of State Marco Rubio there with the Foreign Affairs Minister of Sergei Lavrov from Russia, and and then the key people, and the way the U.S. Machine ran it as, from the press secretary and all that was like essentially, U.S. is wondering to see will the Russians want to have a peace deal, to figure out how serious they are, and then come back to President Zelensky and NATO and see how that all goes internally. Now, at the same time, there was the talks of, President Trump saying that there was so much aid sent to Ukraine when it comes to ammunition, when it comes to just aid overall, and he was the number he says is about $350 billion, and he says we would to wait a way to recoup that money is to have access to rare earth minerals in Ukraine. So that was a big part of the deal to say this is a way we're going to recoup the money we've given you in the last 3 years, and also we're going to, put together the peace talks between Russia and Ukraine, and also on top of that, we heard, Vice President J.D. Vance, we heard also Secretary of State Marco Rubio say, we can't guarantee that you're going to have all parts of Ukraine previous to 2014, right? Because we know that Russia annexed Crimea in 2014, and then we know that there's two other regions that are now in Russian control. So those things we're saying that those may be off the table, essentially saying to Ukraine, but it doesn't take away. There's a peace deal, so the war stops, but also doesn't take away from the fact that we also have to have a deal in terms of recouping the funds that we have given, the aid we've given to Ukraine over these years. So that's where we kind of sit at. And also from all of the European leaders to Canada and them saying, Ukraine must be at the table for the peace talks. So now what we're going to take a look at right now is the meeting. This is a very critical key meeting between Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky and U.S. President Donald Trump. This is important because this meeting is supposed to happen for them to be able to come up with the agreement, to finalize the agreement for the U.S. having access to rare earth minerals in Ukraine as a way to be able to recoup the aid that's been given to Ukraine over these many years, that add up to hundreds of billions of dollars. So this was supposed to be important, and also to discuss the peace talks between Russia and Ukraine. And so the meeting just happened on Friday, and then we saw this. So usually what we've seen with President Trump, with all the world leaders that have come to see him from all over the world, every week he'll have a few world leaders come to visit him. So what he does is they meet in the Oval Office. They have, the press there right in the Oval Office. And I don't think we've had so much access to the Oval Office as we've had with this president. But then they'll ask, just preliminary questions of the two leaders that are there, President Trump and the leader that's visiting. And then after that, Trump will say, okay, that's enough. The press moves out of the Oval Office. They usually go to lunch, have a private meeting, and then they will do a press conference in front of the media gallery, and then again take questions. So we're in the first part of their meeting where they're just at the Oval Office, and there you see the Vice President J.D. Vance there. Next to him, you see Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who is the top diplomat in the United States. And, so we'll go to the scene if you don't have anything else to say about it.
Yeah, sure. Let's watch this video first, and then we're going to discuss that, because in this video, the important things I was discussing, it's one thing to have peace talks, and they didn't have Russia, on the table, and Russia would always say you're having peace talks and you're discussing Russia-Ukraine war, and Russia would always say you don't invite us on the table. And they also wanted to have peace talks in India at one time, and India didn't say it openly. There was a question asked by India as well. You're having peace talks, you're inviting all other countries, and you're not inviting Russia. Here is a complete reversal of the policy. You have discussions now. US is there, other officials are there, the Russian officials are there, but now anybody who's been kept out of the door, off from the table, it's Ukraine. But there was one thing while we were discussing all this, then suddenly we saw this fight, this open out in the public in front of the cameras. So let's have a listen what happened there at the White House, and then there's lots to discuss.
This thing over with. You see the hatred he's got for Putin. It's very tough for me to make a deal with that kind of hate. He's got tremendous hatred. And I understand that, but I can tell you the other side isn't exactly in love with, him either. So it's not a question of alignment. I'm aligned with the world. I want to get the thing set. I'm aligned with Europe. I want to see if we can get this thing done. You want me to be tough? I could be tougher than any human being you've ever seen. I'd be so tough. But you're never going to get a deal that way, so that's the way it goes. All right, one more question.
Hey, I will respond to this. So look, for 4 years in the United States of America, we had a president who stood up at press conferences and talked tough about Vladimir Putin, and then Putin invaded Ukraine and destroyed a significant chunk of the country. The path to peace and the path to prosperity is maybe engaging in diplomacy. We tried the pathway of Joe Biden of thumping our chest and pretending that the President of the United States' words mattered more than the President of the United States' actions. What makes America a good country is America engaging in diplomacy. That's what President Trump is doing.
Can I ask you?
Sure.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. So he occupied our big parts of Ukraine, part of East and Crimea. So he occupied it on 2014. So during a lot of years, so I'm not speaking about just Biden, but those time was Obama, then President Obama, then President Trump, then President Biden, now President Trump, and God bless, now President Trump will stop him. But during 2014, nobody stopped him. He just occupied and took. He killed people. You know what the contact line?
2015.
2014
2014.
and 2014.
2014.
Yeah. So
I was not here.
Yeah, but
that's exactly right.
Yes, but during 2014 till 2022, the situation the same. The people have been dying on the contact line. Nobody stopped him. You know that we had conversations with him, a lot of conversation, my bilateral conversation, and we signed with him, me, like a new president. In 2019, I signed with him the deal. I signed with him, Macron and Merkel, we signed ceasefire. ceasefire. All of them told me that he will never go. We signed him with gas contract. Yes, but after that, he broken this ceasefire. He killed our people, and he didn't exchange prisoners. We signed the exchange of prisoners, but he didn't do it. What kind of diplomacy, JD, you are speaking about? What do you mean?
I'm talking about the kind of diplomacy that's going to end the destruction of your country.
Yes, but if you
Mr. President, with respect, I think it's disrespectful for you to come into the Oval Office and try to litigate this in front of the American media. Right now, you guys are going around and forcing conscripts to the front lines because you have manpower problems. You should be thanking the president for trying to bring an end to this conflict.
Have you ever been to Ukraine that you say what problems we have?
I have been to.
Come once.
I've actually watched and seen the stories, and I know what happens is you bring them on a propaganda tour, Mr. President. Do you disagree that you've had problems bringing people into your military? And do you think that it's respectful to come to the Oval Office of the United States of America and attack the administration that is trying to prevent the destruction of your country?
A lot of questions. Let's start from the beginning.
Sure.
First of all, during the war, everybody has problems, even you, but you have nice ocean and don't feel now, but you will feel it in the future. God bless.
You don't know that.
God bless. God bless. You will not have a war.
Don't tell us what we're going to feel. We're trying to solve a problem. Don't tell us what we're going to feel.
I'm not telling you.
Because you're in no position to dictate that.
That's exactly what you're doing.
You're in no position to dictate what we're going to feel. We're going to feel very good.
You will feel influence.
We're going to feel very good and very strong.
You will feel influence.
You're right now not in a very good position. You've allowed yourself to be in a very bad position, and he happens to be right about it.
From the very beginning of the war.
You're not in a good position. You don't have the cards right now. With us, you start having
not
cards.
Playing cards.
Right now, you don't. You're playing cards.
Mr. President.
You're playing cards.
Serious.
You're gambling with the lives of millions of people. You're gambling with World War III. You're gambling with World War III. And what you're doing is very disrespectful to the country, this country, that's back to you, far more than a lot of people said they should have.
Have you said thank you once? This entire meeting? No, in this entire meeting, have you said thank you? You went to Pennsylvania and campaigned for the opposition in October. Offer some words of appreciation for the United States of America and the president who's trying to save your country.
Please, you think that if you will speak very loudly about the war, you can...
He's not speaking loudly. He's not speaking loudly. Your country's in big trouble.
Can I
answer? Wait a minute. No, you've done a lot of talking. Your country is in big trouble.
I know.
You're not winning. You're not winning this. You have a damn good chance of coming out okay because of us.
Mr. President, we are staying in our country, staying strong from the very beginning of the war. We've been alone, and we are thankful. I said thanks
you haven't been
this
alone.
cabinet.
You haven't been alone.
In this cabinet.
We gave you, through this stupid president, $350 billion. We gave you military equipment, and your men are brave, but they had to use our military. If you didn't have our military equipment, this war would have been over in 2 weeks.
In 3 days. I heard it from Putin. In 3 days. This is something
maybe
new.
Less.
In 2 weeks. Of course, yes.
It's going to be a very hard thing to do business like this.
Again,
I tell you.
Just say thank you.
I said a lot of times to American people.
Accept that there are disagreements, and let's go litigate those disagreements rather than trying to fight it out in the American media when you're wrong. We know that you're wrong.
But you see, I think it's good for the American people to see what's going on.
I understand, sir.
I think it's very important. That's why I kept this going so long. You have to be thankful. You don't have the cards. You're buried there. Your people are dying. You're running low on soldiers. Listen, you're running low on soldiers. It would be a damn good thing. And then you tell us, I don't want a ceasefire. I don't want a ceasefire. I want to go and I want this. Look. If you could get a ceasefire right now, I tell you, you take it so the bullets stop flying and your men stop getting killed.
Of course, we want to stop the war.
But you're saying you don't want a ceasefire.
But I said to you,
I want a ceasefire.
With guarantees.
Because you'll get a ceasefire faster than an agreement.
Ask our people about ceasefire, what they think.
That wasn't with me. That wasn't with me. That was with a guy named Biden, who was not a smart person. That was with Obama.
It was your president.
Excuse me. That was with Obama, who gave you sheets, and I gave you javelins.
Yes.
I gave you the javelins to take out all those tanks. Obama gave you sheets. In fact, the statement is Obama gave sheets and Trump gave javelins. You got to be more thankful, because let me tell you, you don't have the cards. With us, you have the cards. But without us, you don't have any cards.
One more question to Mr. Vice President. I'm sorry.
It's going to be a tough deal to make.
That is a video which has gone viral across the globe. It's this video, this discussion, or actually almost a verbal fight. It's been the topic of discussion everywhere across the media. I mean, quite a few things to discuss on this one. What do you have to say?
Well, it sounds like from watching that is that each leader came to the table that day with having very different things on their mind in terms of what to discuss, and from different perspectives. Definitely none of them saw eye to eye. When you look at Volodymyr Zelensky, President Zelensky, he came, it looked like he came not, usually when you see these diplomatic meetings with world leaders, and when they meet on these like official visits, usually it's a lot of niceties, right? They're usually smiling, and there's a show. Really, right? There's an absolute show of receiving each other, and when they're in the Oval Office, it smiles. And if you notice, like from all the different world leaders that showed up, from Israel to Japan to UK, France, all of the ones
from India,
all of the ones that showed up, you usually see that. There's a very nice way of receiving each other, and then they usually stay quiet, if you noticed, in the Oval Office, and they let President Trump talk, if you notice, all the world leaders. And then if there's a question from the media to ask from the world leader that's visiting the Oval Office, and this is just the past few weeks of just observation, then they answer, but then they usually answer very little, and they say, we defer to the president is so gracious to receive us. They all know their pleas and thank yous when they visit the White House. Now, I'm only speaking today of what I'm observing. I'm not going to speak from what I think in terms of my opinion of how things should go. It's very just as an observer what I'm seeing. And so with these world leaders who come who are received by President Trump in the White House are very gracious, usually, if you notice. And you can watch the last few weeks of what we've seen. This time around, where you have, first of all, J.D. Vance doesn't usually talk at the Oval Office, sort of like casual press conference, because then they have the official press conference after this, usually. So he's talking, and then that's when President Zelensky interjected, said, what are you talking about? Really putting him into question, saying whatever you're saying doesn't make sense, is essentially the bottom line of what he said, right? And that point, we all know, we've seen J.D. Vance in debates in this past election. He's a 40-year-old vice president, very articulate, great debater, has his history down packed, more than, he fills in the gap where President Trump doesn't have, because President Trump doesn't have the history and the policy background. He's a guy who knows what he did on his term, he knows what the guy after him did, and he knows what it took him to get him back into office. But if you want to talk about dates and this and that, that's not your guy. He's a guy who just understands the bottom line and likes to do a deal. So J.D. Vance fills those gaps, and so when President Zelensky pretty much undermined J.D. Vance, Vice President J.D. Vance, that was when you saw the conversation completely shift. Now, did what President Zelensky say, was that accurate or inaccurate? There was a lot of accuracy, because he was saying, hey, this is our experience, this is what we experienced, we signed a deal before and he still invaded us, what are the guarantees right now? That's where he's coming from. And also, President Zelensky has had a lot of support from world leaders in the last 3 years. He's been in a war for 3 years. He's had a lot of support. He just came from meeting with the NATO allies, and they're not part of NATO, but the NATO allies, European allies, and Canada's been an ally, and until 5 weeks ago, U.S. was an ally. So he's come very emboldened in a way, because no other leader has come to the White House and talked the way he did. So he came saying, hey, the world agrees with me. They've been agreeing with me for the last 3 years. And so let me ask you, Vice President Vance, what are you talking about? And so that shifted diplomacy right there, right? Diplomatic talks right there. And that was the critical moment where then J.D. Vance said, hey, did you even say thank you? Are you going to really start this in front of the media in terms of like really saying, what are you talking about? What do you know? You don't know anything in front of our media in our house. So, and then you saw that's when everything just went downhill. And then both sides doubled down. You see President Zelensky double down and say no, and really have a go. We've never seen this ever. And then J.D. Vance go. And then when President Trump kicks in, that's when the show's over. He raises his voice. They're yelling at each other. And I can talk about shall I talk about from the
please.
President's perspective?
Please.
So now when President Trump comes in, President Trump's like, you're on the hook for hundreds of billions of dollars, right? So there's a couple of things. There's how are you going to pay us back? And also, we're trying to stop this war that's been going on for 3 years. That doesn't look like it's going to end because you are being funded and Russia's continuing their war, right? So how's this going to end? So A, how is this going to end? And then also, how are you going to pay us back? And President Zelensky is still saying, sounds like what he's saying is, no, we must win the war. We must establish our stance on the war, meaning there's no deadline, there's no end to it. And if President Trump didn't get elected and it was Kamala Harris who got elected, maybe there wouldn't even be peace talks still. It would just be here's some more money and keep fighting, because the way President Zelensky has, campaigned on this is we're fighting Russia, so you don't have to fight Russia in the future. So help us, because if they take us down tomorrow, they're going to come for you. Seemed like that's his line, right? Because that's when he said, he goes, there's an ocean between us, but then you're next. Like, it's going to happen to you. And that's when you saw President Trump kick in, because he goes, Americans are going to be influenced. And, he's talking to President Trump, who went through the Russian collusion saga in this first election against Hillary Clinton, right? And he brings this up. You didn't see it in this clip, but he starts bringing it up, saying that it was the whole Democratic thing and that there was Russian collusion and Putin could have done something back then but didn't. So President Trump saying that, in other words, he was saying, President Putin respects me and I'm the only one who can get you this deal, and you're coming into my house and you're saying, what are you talking about? When you also need to sign. And this was the third occasion where he was supposed to sign the deals on the mineral deal. There was the visit that he got from the U.S. A few weeks ago for the signing the deals on the critical earth minerals for the U.S. To be able to find some way of repayment. Then he said, no, we'll do this in Europe. When J.D. Vance and Marco Rubio were there, and then it wasn't signed again. So this White House was a third chance for President Zelensky to come to the table and sign for this in a way to say, okay, this is how I'm going to pay you back, and you're going to help us do a peace deal. We may not get our, territory back, but at least no more bombs are going to get dropped, right? So it's very interesting that you can see how they all came to the table with very different things in mind, and how they were called out. And so after that, there was no lunch. They said that the lunch was left outside, and that President Trump asked President Zelensky to leave the White House. So there's no press conference, and that puts everything, up in the air about what's going to happen, because now there's speculation that President Trump may stop the shipment of, the ammunition to keep the war. So if that happens, then what it does also, it looks at European countries' leaders, and it also looks at NATO and saying, hey, it's your continent. And President Trump's been saying that. He's like, we're in our own continent. This is your continent. He's saying this to European leaders, saying, maybe you guys need to, put more support, because they haven't given the same level of support financially as the U.S. have done. And this is after a time where this is the same president who's talking about tariffs, same president who wants to balance out reciprocal tariffs for the imbalance of trade. And so this is the same president who's saying, you're taking tax dollars, American tax dollars for this war. We want it to end, and we want to know how we're going to get the money recouped for American tax dollars. And President Zelensky's like, no, I'm fighting for everyone. I'm fighting for the world by taking on Russia. Completely different mindsets here.
Yeah. Quite a few points that we highlighted. Thanks for that. Zelensky, President Zelensky, he's in a very difficult situation. And moving forward, I think whatever little options were left for, backing Ukraine, I think they're almost off the table for now. Let's see how it goes any further for them. And start with many of the Republicans and few of the Democrats are also asking this question now. Let me start with Europe first of all. You're right. The European countries, they're all backing up. They're all still saying they're all support for Ukraine. I'm hearing voices here in Canada as well. Canada has supported Ukraine. But what can they do for Ukraine? You're right. I mean, President Trump, he said in this press conference that we have supported Ukraine for a good $350 billion. Even during the elections, President Trump would always say this, that yes, Zelensky is the biggest salesman. He would come here and say something and get billions of dollars. So he was always targeted. There's a history to them as well, personally as well. I'll talk about that later on. But I think whether it's Germany, whether it's France, England, Canada even, they can all talk of supporting Ukraine, but how will they support? Can they really give that much of a budget?
Put their money where their mouth is?
Put their money where their mouth is and actually walk the talk? I doubt they could do that, because are they going to put boots on the ground? I don't think so. Their defense budget, the combined defense budget of Europe, give or take, it's roughly around $400 billion. So US alone has $900 billion and Russia has $150 billion, and you have China $300 billion. So I don't think so they could afford leaving US out and supporting Ukraine in terms of finance, in terms of boots on the ground, and so many other things. So that's the question. And China, India, they're almost out of it. The max they would do is just give aid, and China is more allied with Russia. So what other options does Ukraine have? They don't have many options. Yeah.
So here's the other thing. When President Zelensky in that clip, right, when Vice President Vance says the only way is diplomacy because we saw the previous administration get tough on Russia and then the invasion still happened. And then when President Zelensky says, what are you talking about? Essentially, bottom line, like, you don't know anything. What are you saying? Right? That's what he said. He goes, what are you talking about, JD? I want to ask you. Because we signed the peace agreement and then the treaty and it was an invasion. But he missed the part that the treaty you signed, right? After that, why did Russia come to the border? You tried to join NATO. That's a big deal, right? The whole existence of NATO is against Russia. That's the whole, like, you can't say, oh, I started an association for a cause and then, for that very cause, go and disrupt the balance of things. So, I'm not saying I'm supporting one side over the other, but we're talking very objectively about what we just saw, right? So for him to say, we signed a treaty and we went into war, well, you could also look at it as, what President Trump's been saying is like, well, when you go and when you go and put interest to joining NATO and you're on a border country to Russia, and then that's when things escalated. And the other thing is when the Russian troops came to the border of Ukraine, they were there for what? For a few weeks? How long were they there for? And at that point, when they crossed the border, I remember watching in the news Ukrainians who were like running away for their lives. Millions of Ukrainians have been displaced because of this war, and so many have died. I remember watching it on the news, them saying that we didn't think they were going to cross the border. There was no warning by our government that, pack up your stuff and exit. So it was a very sudden thing because they didn't think it was going to happen, and it did. But the Russian troops were there at the border for a while. so when you look at that entire thing and you think, okay, that's why choosing your world leaders are so important, because you choose your world leader, and this leader, in this case, President Zelensky, has a dream to make Ukraine join NATO. Meanwhile, that's a massive conflict on the Russian side sharing a border, and that was the only thing. The reason it was done is because they promised they weren't going to go west of which country. It was not supposed to go, when NATO was first established, it was supposed to stop where? At Germany?
Yeah, but two points on, actually 3 points on this one.
Please.
First of all, I think it is US and NATO members, including Canada was also one of the founding members. It's a current policy of NATO members to expand. Much before, because Ukraine came into existence in 1991. So much before even Ukraine came into existence, it was always the policy of US leading the NATO, and Britain, France, all these countries, NATO members, it was their policy, and Canada was also the founding member, it was their policy to always keep on expanding NATO. That's point number one. Second, you're right, it always bothers Russia, because Russia always says, what else is NATO for? It's against Russia. So they're always kind of skeptical whenever any country plans to join, but this has always been encouraged by European Union, by most countries of Europe, and by US as well. So here comes Zelensky. For him, it wasn't much of an option anyways. Why? Because Russia invaded Ukraine in 2014. They annexed Crimea. Nobody came to the rescue. Even early in 2008, when Russia invaded Georgia, nobody came to the rescue. So in 2014 also, a big part of Ukraine, Crimea was annexed. Though they could say this, that there's a history, yes, and that's true as well. I did a whole show on this one, just for our viewers, but I'd like to tell you that I did a complete show that was in English, I did in Punjabi as well. What is the history? And actually Zelensky, from Vladimir Putin to Vladimir Zelensky, what does Vladimir mean in Russian, what does Vladimir mean in Ukrainian, and how's a 1,000-year history of the Ukrainian people and Russian people. Crimea was, by the way, part of Russia and was given as a gift to, I covered that in Editor's Take earlier as well. But I won't digress too much, I won't stay on the current situation, little bit giving a historical context as well. So now what happens in 2014, when Russia, takes over, and I think, if I remember my facts correctly, 27th February, it was also the month of February again. They attacked in February 2022, but it was 27th February 2014 when they attacked and they annexed Crimea. So, and, Vladimir Putin says, oh, it was our territory anyways, we just took it back. Yes, it was your territory, but then India could say Pakistan was our territory, pre-partition. Bangladesh was our territory. So, but now they can't take it back. Tomorrow Mexico can say, certain parts of US were our territory, now we want it back. Certain parts of Canada were British territories or French territories, now they can't take it back. Now, everything was settled. So anyways, but they took that part. And Russia also started supporting, anti-Ukraine insurgents as well. Now the whole issue was, even before this NATO, yes, NATO is one part of the issue, but when I covered it very elaborately, there is a massive financial aspect as well. Because in Ukraine, most of the time, it had a pro-Russian government for most of the time. Now, the economy wasn't going anywhere. Even Russian economy wasn't going anywhere. So the people of Ukraine, they said, what do we do here? So European Union was offering a financial package that, yes, you join European Union, you become part of NATO, and we give you a massive financial package. Russia didn't want that, rightfully so. Of course, Russia won't want. Why should Ukraine become an alliance at European Union?
It's about sharing the border. That's why Finland and the other countries haven't joined until obviously this war. Yeah. But it was always the agreement was you don't come to the border. There was a line drawn.
You're absolutely right. Yeah. You're absolutely right. Actually, it started with 6 countries, and every time during the Cold War, any new country would become part of the NATO alliance. Russia always objected. Mm-hmm. And yes, and I agree to that part as well. US shouldn't have provoked Russia till that extent. Yes, we did a lot better during the Cold War era, during the Cuba Missile Crisis as well. But then now things have gotten different, and Trump, in a way, if at all, Russia, and I was listening to one of his things, and interestingly, just a week ago, I said this very similar thing on my radio show. I said, what are the four major powers right now? US, China, India, and Russia. And all four of them have nuclear weapons. In case these four, and I use, there's a trust deficit between all the four powers right now. And in case these four powers can come together, this world can be a much better place. US, China, India, and Russia. Same thing Trump said a week after. Recently, he mentioned the same thing. He said all these four countries should work together. I said they should have, trust on each other and work together. He said they should work together. Yeah, but that's an ideal world scenario. Now what happens is that, yes, Russia always wanted, okay, fine, do not, one after the other countries are joining NATO alliance. You have 18, you have 20, you have 20. So obviously, and there's a clause, if you attack one country, there's a clear clause in there in NATO, that if you attack one country, then it is considered an attack on all the countries, and they will come to your rescue, which I'll discuss that later on in Ymedia Foreign Policy in detail, that today, I doubt that will happen. We're almost seeing a very weakened NATO, to the point that is, imagine, God forbid that happens, but imagine if Russia or any hostile country towards Canada, because of Arctic region or any other thing, they attack Canada. Do you think Russia, as we are here right now, do you think US will come to save Canada? I don't know. I can't say yes or no.
Well, there'll be a deal done. We'll save you if you give us X, Y, Z.
Or
you become a state. We'll save you when you become a state. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, Russia right now cannot go into more wars. That's for sure, right? They had, the amount of embargoes that have been put in place and freezing their assets. Like, they're not in a position to take on more wars. That's.
No. What if China attacks Canada? China has been quite hostile towards Canada, and our Prime Minister Trudeau, he got a lecture in front of the cameras from President Xi Jinping. We all saw that, and how did China bully us? We all know the two Michaels were taken, in prison there.
China's more interested in Taiwan before they do something to Canada. Right? But so at the same time, so when you had under President Zelensky, showing the interest, trying to join NATO. They never joined NATO because NATO said, "Oh no, sorry, you can't join." They don't have the agreement. So that's why Russia was saying, this is a proxy war, the U.S. proxy war using Ukraine to do this, and also NATO, because this is where President Zelensky put himself in a bind, and his country and the Ukrainians, like, the agreement was always no NATO to the border of Russia. Now you've took a step to join NATO. Now NATO is not even accepting your membership, and now you're in a war. So you have millions of people displaced, women and children who left the country. The majority of men stayed to fight the war that have been killed in the war. So you have orphans, children without parents, children without fathers. You have widows. You have women living in, Poland with their kids, and some in Canada, all dispersed. What kind of economic future do you think these broken families have when they show up as refugees to some of these countries where you have to figure out where to work, where to live, and let's say a woman shows up with 2-3 kids? What happens? Think about the generations of Ukrainians that have been displaced, their economic future in terms of the new countries they're in, learning a new language, figuring out what to do, and raising these children who are highly traumatized. I mean, think about it. In the West, in Canada, in the United States, we talk about mental health, but none of us have seen war the same way. We talk about, our mental health, and that's a serious thing. I'm not saying it's not a serious thing, but think about the mental health of people who are in wars and have become refugees and have lost parents and family members and have been displaced. Think about that. And then we talk about integration. So President Zelensky did not see the big picture when he put himself in this situation. I'm not saying, that any other country, Russia's right or that. But as a world, as a leader of your country, if you're going to take a stance on something, understand the fallout and the implications, not just for your people, but what it means if you do not have leverage, right? What leverage do they have? Now they're indebted by the United States, European countries, indebted. It's a war that's been going on for 3 years. Nobody has an end date. Nobody has come to any sort of agreement on both sides. I remember year one, they met in Turkey to have that first peace talk. They walked away, nothing happened. They're not seeing eye to eye. So what's the plan? At some point, the bleeding has to stop, figuratively and literally, right? People have to stop dying, and the bleeding of what's happening to their country, their history, the amount of funding, all of that has to stop at some point. And there has to be some sort of a plan to rebuild. So now, going into President Zelensky's circumstance, say, okay, well, what choices do you have, right? Like, if for example, we're talking about if you can't afford to pay your mortgage and your home goes onto foreclosure, what choices do you have? You have to sell. You have to recoup the money for the bank, or you go into a foreclosure and you still have to leave the property, right? Like, there's things that you would like to do, and there's things that you have to do, right? And it sounded in this meeting, President Zelensky is still focused on the things he would like to do, right? Which is fight the war, which is continue doing it until they get into some place, and having security assurances for XYZ, not signing the critical minerals deal because, he's got to pay back. So there's a lot of things that at this point you have to say, okay, what do I have to do? What is the end game here for me to bring back my country to some sort of level of predictability? Okay, I have to sign a minerals deal because the world superpower wants to know how I'm going to pay them back. You have to come to the table at that and say, okay, well, it's going to take years to figure out how to extract and come to that, but you need to if like the same thing, like we talked about the bank and the foreclosure, you have to show some sort of asset. Right, you have to, and this is what they were asking for. So for you to attack VP Vance or President Trump, when you have to show some guarantee back, because he's asking for a security guarantee from the U.S. with the peace talks, but they're asking you for a security guarantee on the loans you've taken. So you can't. So I don't. Like, it looks like he's not understanding the position, and that's why President Trump's saying you don't have the cards. You cannot. And he goes, you're emboldened because I gave you the ability to be emboldened, because I gave you ammunition. I funded your war, right? Meaning the American taxpayers. You drive through America. I've driven through America twice now, from Canada throughout to America, from East Coast all the way to the West Coast, Northeast to the Southwest, and there's communities that are in poverty. Like, the Americans have healthcare problems, infrastructure problems. They have a lot of problems. This is taxpayer dollars. This isn't, Biden writing a check from his personal account or for Trump signing. This is taxpayer dollars. This is tax dollars that people are saying we need it back in our communities, right? We're working hard. We're paying our taxes. Can you please spend the taxes in our country, please? That's what they're asking for. So when in Ontario here, when we say, where's our healthcare, where's our education, it's because we're talking about tax dollars. We're not expecting those tax dollars to go into another country, to fund a war that doesn't seem to have an end date, that doesn't seem to have a resolution, that doesn't seem to have any of those things. So with President Zelensky, he needs to really have a moment where he's like, okay, what's the plan? Whatever so far, when is this going to end? Has it been working? Has it not been working? And how am I going to pay all these people back? And also make sure I build my country, because those critical minerals deal would help their economy, because they need to rebuild. It's going to take how many billions of dollars to just build their crumbling, and then bring back all the Ukrainians that are refugees in different countries. Give them an opportunity to be able to come back. So until he has any of those answers, it didn't look like the prime time he was ready to have this meeting. Yeah.
3 points on this one, and I agree with you. I'll start from this one. I've been talking about this on our radio and TV many times, that from the Canadian perspective first, why would we spend money on weapons supporting Ukraine? No, we shouldn't be doing that. We can support Ukraine in two ways. One is providing any aid. There are almost 1 million people, who have lost their lives, or there are many who are critically injured, and you rightly said, so millions are displaced right now. So we can offer them aid. We can do that, number one. We're already doing that. Second is there are so many Ukrainians who've come to Canada and taken refuge here. Okay, fine. They want to seek asylum there. Welcome them. Fine. That's the second part. But we also gave millions of dollars to Ukraine. I've always questioned that, and I would still question them for three reasons. Number one, as you rightly said, so yes, US is right. US is right. We need this money in US. And we as Canadians, we're right too. We need this money in Canada. And I'll also give you one example in the interest of time. There's so many of them actually. Canada paid approximately, I guess, $450 million to develop a missile defense system for Ukraine. They gave this money to US. After a year, Vladimir Zelensky says, oh, we didn't receive that missile defense system that Canada promised us when he was here. Okay, fine. Nobody bothers. Nobody is checking. But then media comes out, and this story has been discussed in media not that many times, but I've discussed that because I kept on digging on this story. And yes, there were a lot of mainstream journalists as well. They kept on writing about that, but this story didn't resonate. I don't know for whatever reason. I spoke so many times about this story. I said, then they said, okay, fine. And then they realized the order has not been even placed in US. The order has not even been placed, and they say, oh, fine. So Canada is giving money for weapons we don't even have. Okay, fine. I'm not in favor of even giving weapons there to Ukraine. Why we are giving you weapons? It's your fight, sir. Canada doesn't have that much money. We're not even able to build our own defense. So yes, we can provide you aid in terms of any medical supplies or any other aid that you need. We'll supply that. Yeah, it's a war-torn country. We'll supply that. People from Ukraine, yeah, we're going to provide you asylum here, support you here. That is something. Or support the peace talks. We can do that. We can offer some sort of mediation. We can do that. But we picked a massive fight with Russia. And we're giving them millions of dollars for ammunition and weapons that we don't even have. So we're giving them. And the money, we don't even know where it is right now. It hasn't been reached. And the second reason I've always said this, when US, they're claiming we have spent in excess of 300 billion. President Trump is saying, no, 350 billion. And then there are billions of dollars flowing. How much does it matter if we are also giving, 450 million for this, or even 1 or 2 billion? Does it? I mean, if 350 billion or 400 or even 500 billion cannot save Ukraine, Canada's $1 or $2 billion, that's a lot of money for us.
And this war has happened at a time where the world has experienced the highest inflation, where cost of food has gone through the roof, cost of gas has gone through the roof, cost of housing. This is from 2022. Inflation happened as a result of, all the COVID spending, interest rates, and that had to go up from, and so at a time where we've just been talking about unaffordability. I can't afford to eat. I can't afford to pay my bills. I can't afford to do this. I can't. And then to say, okay, well, I'm sorry, what border? You want to join NATO and you're at the border of Russia, and that was something that was always a red line on the issue of NATO expansion. And I'm sorry, what? And even when you take refugees, which is a very noble cause for countries to do, but when you take a mass influx, that also is on healthcare, infrastructure, housing, that's also funding as well, right? So you're right, that's also easier to do than the whole ammunition. But it's like, when you look at it, and then when you have then Zelensky to show up with this attitude, I understand you've been in a war, I understand it's a very devastating situation you're in, but can you really come in a level of entitlement? Because that's what I saw, entitlement. Where's the humility? Look what happened to your country. Why that happened on your watch? Your country went into devastation under your watch. Where's the humility in that? Because the buck stops at the leader of the country. Whatever happens, that's why whatever is happening in Canada, Trudeau had to resign, because the buck stops at you, your Prime Minister, Mr. Prime Minister. what's happened to our country? So the prime minister resigned. When you look at Ukraine, it's the president Zelensky. It stops at you. This is what's happened to your country. What is your vision? What is your plan to get your country back on track? And if you don't know what that is, and you just want to stay in war, and you expect everyone to support you, because that's what it looked like. He came with an expectation.
Yeah.
Have you ever seen somebody put out their hand asking for something but have an attitude of expectation? Have you ever seen the opposites of please, which usually comes with humility, to where is it? Why isn't it enough? Like, that's what you see. And then you saw him closing his arms like this. JD, what are you talking about? Explain to us what you're talking about. And this, I'm not defending Russia. But I'm just saying for a diplomatic meeting where you are a guest in a foreign country that supported your interests, you do not show up this way. This is the lesson, what we saw of what not to do in a diplomacy situation that was the master class of what not to do.
Yeah, I agree to all those points. Actually, the buck stops at the leader, and President Vladimir Zelensky has to take the ownership. And probably I think that's one of the reasons that he's even offering to resign right now. And Lindsay Lohan, I was listening, they're also saying in the US, many of the senators and other leaders are saying either he has to apologize, Marco Rubio said apologize, or you have to resign. So that's the discussion going on. And the buck stops with the leader, agreed. The third point that you mentioned, that yes, you have to be very careful in your diplomatic efforts when you're dealing with the superpower, and especially someone like Trump. So you have to be very, very, and especially the fourth point as well, especially when you're at the Oval Office. So make sure these are all the things that you have to remember. But there is another aspect to this story as well that has to be discussed more as well. It was you as much as the decision, and you're right. You have to take ownership. You made the decisions, but it was US also all the time supporting, whether it was Obama administration, whether it was Joe Biden and Trump. And Trump, by the way, we also have to bring this part also into the discussion, that Trump has a history with Vladimir Zelensky, especially when there were allegations made that yes, Trump, did he ask any favors regarding Hunter Biden from Vladimir Zelensky? So maybe Vladimir Zelensky, there's allegations that he refused at that time to give any undue favors to Trump. So he has a sort of history also. These leaders, they have no love lost. It's an open secret. They don't see eye to eye. And now he had no choice that yes, Trump has been elected. Maybe he thought at one time that Trump won't come again. So that's why he didn't support him. So Trump wanted that. And another part, the entire Europe, you name a country, the entire Europe is supporting, including Canada. They're all supporting Ukraine today. I know that doesn't serve the purpose, but at the end of the day, I also want to question what message is US sending. I know maybe President Zelensky should have or could have behaved differently and resolved this issue. But then what message are we sending today? We go to Europe and we tell them, guys, you're on your own. 5% of GDP. They don't have that sort of budget with this economy, inflation, and all these challenges right now to go 5% of their GDP for defense budget. Canada, 5% of your GDP for your defense budget. I doubt we'll reach a target of 3 or 4%, let alone 5%. So where are we leaving all these NATO alliances?
So here's the other thing, when you get support from countries and you get it in funding and in solidarity verbally, and ammunition and training and all that stuff. But eventually, when you get that support, it's for a period of time, and then you're supposed to come back and say, well, I need support for this amount of time, because then the plan is, then we get on our feet and this is what we're going to do. We do that with anything. When we take a loan, we figure out a way to, the dates we're going to pay it back by, and this is how we're going to do it. Our family, as we're growing up, when you're in school, your parents support you because one day you're going to get on your feet. There's always a conclusion to the level of support you get, because then you're going to be self-sufficient. In this case, it looks like this wasn't communicated how Ukraine is going to get back on track and get into a position where they can rebuild and have the peace. Now, what it looks like is when you ask, when the countries, the NATO countries in NATO are not meeting their 2% GDP target, and they're asking for expansion. So not only are you asking for expansion and you're getting more members, but you're also, as members, not meeting the target. Like, this is the fact that you exist is you agreed to 2% GDP for this alliance. You haven't met that. Canada's at 1.3%, I believe. The other countries are not there. So, like, what's happening with NATO now? With the U.S. saying we're going to move it, we think it shouldn't be 3%. This is J.D. Vance, Vice President Vance, saying it shouldn't be, it's 2%. It shouldn't be 3. It shouldn't be 4. But we believe it should be 5. What does that mean? If 5% is pushed, and then U.S. says, you know what? You guys aren't meeting your obligation, because U.S. has been saying that all the time. You guys are not meeting your obligation, so we're going to pull out. What will that do? That will collapse NATO. And if Russia's ever looking for any interest in all this, is to collapse NATO. And when NATO collapses, they have to come. It's like NAFTA. What happened to NAFTA? What happened to Kuzma? Right? It's like, what happened? NAFTA got renegotiated to Kuzma. Kuzma, like, the agreements, we're going into tariffs. This is all not part of the agreement, right? Because it's a free trade agreement. When we're talking about the U.S.-Canada relations with Mexico, right? So everything is just kind of, upon why existed, the agreements that were made, it's all coming apart. So when
But who's responsible for that? Trump. He's triggered all this.
Not necessarily. So NAFTA exists because it was an alliance formed against Russia, really.
NATO.
When you look at NATO. What did I say?
NAFTA.
Sorry,
NATO.
NATO, yeah, not NAFTA, sorry, NATO. And there was the line that was drawn of the countries it can't go past to be able to expand. They didn't care. They did that. Then it was 2% GDP. No, they're not meeting their targets. So really, on what the agreement stands for, a lot of things are not being met. Critical things are not being met. And then with moving it to the, now Finland has put in their application. These are all on border countries to Russia, right? Which is always the red line. And so, whose fault is it? You can't say it's one over the other, because there's so many issues. An agreement is an agreement. When somebody defaults on a clause of an agreement, you have every stance position to be able to go after what it would mean to whether to go after them in terms of what would follow if you don't follow the agreement, or to be able to pull out of the agreement. But there's always implications of how you're able to, if somebody doesn't follow the agreement, and it looks like the agreement hasn't been followed in those sense. So it's not one fault or the other. It seems like it's multiple things. And also, with Trump going back into office, we're in a world of survival of the fittest. And if your country doesn't have, a military presence, it seems like, if your country isn't economically intelligent on how to position your country when it comes to your labor force, when it comes to your industries, right? What industries do you have? When it comes to your, in this case, the conversations solely around like minerals and energy, which the world still needs. If your country hasn't strategically figured out how to have these industries, how you can meet the demand of the marketplace, not only in your country, but the world, and position yourself, then you're going to be out of luck. And this is what we're seeing right now, where everybody has just kind of been complacent and just like sleeping at the wheel, because, it doesn't matter who gets into office in every country, it's ideology. Now you have a president in the United States who's transactional. It's not about ideology, it's about transactional, it's about, and I don't think people need to be, the people that say, why is this transactional, and what is this thing about making a deal? We make a deal every day in our life. So guess what? From the moment we're born, we're making deals. For example, me as a woman, I'm making a deal on how I should appear, how I should talk, education level, this, that. If I have a belief system in a certain religion, there's a deal that if I, follow the religion in terms of who I pray to, how I pray, what I do, what I don't do, the deal that I'm taking on is that I will be blessed in my mind, right? In terms of, because I'm following the religion, that's a deal. When I get into my vehicle and I drive my car and I'm following the rules of the road as per my license in the province of Ontario, that's a deal I've made with law enforcement that it's an unspoken deal that if I don't break the rules of the road, then I shouldn't be pulled over unless it's a stop check, right? So there's a level of predictability because we make deals. When you purchase your home, you're making a deal. If you rent, you're making a deal. When you go and you're using a currency, we're making deals. We just don't call it deals, but it creates a level of expectations because there's transaction. If I do this and this transaction happens, this is what occurs. Now you have somebody in the White House who usually at that level of when you are the leader of your country, it's all ideology, which countries meet us on ideology and we support each other. Here's someone who's saying, I don't really care about ideology. I care about, what's our GDP. I care about our numbers in terms of job losses. I care about, what we're going to do because I say I'm going to do a lot for this country, bring back jobs, bring back manufacturing. I care about trade deficits. I care about those numbers. And now these are what's in my toolkit for what I'm going to do. Okay, there's a trade deficit. Okay, I'll put a tariff. Okay, if I put a tariff, then if American companies are somewhere else because it's cheaper to operate in a different country, well, I'm going to say you need to come back and then have a better. So this is the person they're talking to. And now the world is looking at it and saying, oh, okay, so if we're in that case, then everyone has now to up their game. Canada, look what's happened to Canada. And in a matter of weeks, we don't have a prime minister, 2 premiers stepped down, the deputy prime minister stepped down, Ontario went into an election, cabinet ministers aren't coming back. There's a pivot in messaging, platform, everyone's getting an identity shift, like Krista Freeland all of a sudden is against the carbon tax, everything has shifted, right? It's like everyone's just got an identity shift. And why? Because do you notice that since President Trump has been inaugurated in office, we're no longer talking about how many genders there are. We're no longer talking about if men can use women's bathrooms or if they identify as this. We're no longer talking about that teacher. Do you remember that teacher in that school board who wore the prosthetic breasts? And we were talking about, should that teacher do this? And then we're no longer talking about these things. I'm not saying it's important or not important. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is now we're talking about economy. We're talking about jobs. We're talking about how to be competitive. We're talking about, all of these things that actually make a country.
Yeah, quite a few points that you've made, First things first, regarding, yes, Donald Trump, he's really shaken up the geopolitical system, the current order. He's really, shaken up all that. Whether for good or bad, I think only time will tell. My 2 cents on this one is either Donald Trump will start giving concessions and make deals, whatever he said up until now for all those areas that he said, starting from Ukraine as well. Because one of the reasons Vladimir Zelensky is not agreeing on this one, because first things first, he's saying, whatever territory Russia has taken away. So if you call it a ceasefire today, so that means Crimea was already annexed by Russia. And now we're talking here more territory annexed by Russia, and there is no discussion of taking that back. So 2 losses for Ukraine. Third loss is, what is the will of the people of Ukraine? The Ukrainians elected Vladimir Zelensky on this particular point, that he campaigned that we will be allying with European Union because they wanted better economy. Because that's where the Ukrainians saw their future, an alliance with the European Union instead of Russia. Because they had alliance with Russia, there was a pro-Russian president there, but then they all said, no, our economy is going down, we're facing challenges. So the Ukrainians wanted to align with the European Union. So that part is being taken off the table, and then NATO was also part of that. So So here is Volodymyr Zelensky. We've seen many leaders run away when there are attacks from Syria. We saw that Mohammad al-Bashir, he ran away. We've seen that in Afghanistan. But here is a leader who stays there with his family, and many times he's on the front lines. That's why he's being praised for his courage and everything. And I do understand that, yes, you're right about the deal thing. Sometimes it's not about being right. Sometimes it's about doing something which in the long run might serve the people, and telling the people as well. Yeah, as much as we know, that yes, aligning with European Union would be good, NATO, it'll be good. But right now, looking at the current scenario, maybe we concede this and we agree that yes, right now, and let's look at the bigger picture. So maybe that could be a solution, but then is that the real solution? That's the question I think President Zelensky is asking. The other thing, as we were talking about the shakeup that Donald Trump has done, the reasons are right. I totally agree with that, and I actually support all the reasons. The reasons are right. Yes, you cannot give billions and billions of dollars of aid which you don't even know where it's going. Is it really serving the purpose of US, or is it actually even being counterproductive? Because maybe the aid is ending up with those people who are actually against US as well. So stopping the aid or doing all these discussions, renegotiating the deals, it's all good. And in case Trump gives the concessions and squeeze in some better deals, good for US, that's good. But we're risking alienating our allies, including the Europe. And you're right, it has shaken up. It's not just Canada who's, once again sitting on the drawing board again, that we have to figure out our position in the world. And it's very good for Canada. I've always supported that. Canada being a G7 country, South Korea is not even a G7 country. China, India, they're all big economies, but India is not a G7 nation because we're a rich country. So Canada is once again on the drawing board and saying, where do we stand? How do we create an economy much independent of US? Fine. That's what the new German Chancellor has already said. Step by step, we have to move out of our reliance on US. England, France, so many other countries are doing that. So here we are alienating our allies, right? And these are all liberal democracies, whether it's Ukraine, whether it's England, France, Germany, Canada, Australia. These are all liberal democracies. You know what? What US is looking for, Trump is soft on leaders like Xi Jinping, Vladimir Putin, and with Modi as well. These are very strong leaders of strong countries. So I don't know whether this will. I could go wrong on this one, but I think as much as the intent behind whatever Trump is doing seems to be good, let's make America great again. Yeah, I've been listening this from the time of Nixon. It's not the first time I heard this, right? And it's not the first time, yes, President Nixon, they also applied tariffs on Canada. And by the way, it was because of the trade deal that we broke. The very Canadian Federation, among other reasons it came into existence, one of the reasons was this, that yes, US said we are cancelling the trade agreement with Canada. This was the first time, 100 years ago, when they cancelled that trade agreement. And one of the reasons that Canada stood strong, 1812-4, we all know that, how Canada came out strong. And one of the reasons for Canadian Federation, and all this was, where was this all born? Why the hockey team of Montreal is called Montreal Canadiens? The Canadians, where did the concept of Canadians come from? We were a British and a French colony. But the Canadians, this concept of Canadians, yes, we're Canadians. We're not a British colony, we're not a French colony, and thanks but no thanks, we're very, very different than Americans. Very different than you. That's the very definition of being a Canadian. All this came from when US 50, 100, 200 years ago, when US comes to Canada, and whether there's a threat of invasion. Yes, for a very long time there was a threat of invasion by US on Canada. It's only, I think we're more aligned with Britain up until, I would say, the Second World War. Yeah, at least up until before the First World War, we were much more aligned with Britain than with the US. First World War, yes, US came into prominence. Second World War, US came out really strong, and then we shifted our alliance from Britain to US. Otherwise, there was always a threat of invasion, and here we are. No, we are Canadians. So I think it's good for Canada. It's good for Europe. Stand up, guys. Don't rely too much on US. But is it? I'm now talking from the US perspective. Today US has much more leverage on Britain, Germany, France, Italy, Canada, Australia, New Zealand than Russia, China, or India would have. Right? Russia, China, and India. What sort of relationships they have with Western liberal democracies? Okay, Russia doesn't. It's almost. It has hostility towards almost all these Western democracies that I was talking about. India doesn't have any sway with much of these countries. India has very good relationships. If you ask me, if there's one country which has benefited the most out of this, Modi, he goes to US, warm welcome, red carpet, coming back, now he's planning to go to Russia. His foreign minister, S. Jaishankar, he meets Vladimir Putin. How many foreign affairs ministers can meet Putin? They are building very strong relationship with China as we speak. They say US and China rivalry is there. And there are many China hawks in Trump administration right now as we speak. And things could get worse on the trade side. He's just announced 10% trade, but things could get worse on China. India, direct flights, they're resuming. The direct flights are resuming. They're talking on the border disputes. So India is having good relations with Russia, very good relationship with US, good relationship with Israel, Palestine, Iran, everyone good relationships. The only one question that was asked continuously for India in the last 4 or 5 years, why are you buying oil from Russia? Thanks, but no thanks. Now, when US and Russia are aligning together, when they're in talks, that question is off the table. US wants to sell weapons to India because India is the largest importer of arms today. So US is in line. France, they would sell just 1%. India would buy only 1% of their arms. Now they're buying almost 33% of their arms from France. They're buying a lot of arms from Israel, Russia. US, their market share went from 8% to 15%. US says we have everything. What do you want? What do you want? Let us know. And we are much better. You're buying Sukhois from Russia. You're buying Rafale from France. We have much better 5th generation fighter jets. We can give it to you. Let's talk. And the bilateral trade. Now US and for India, the largest trading partners right now is China, US, and UAE. So we don't want to talk about UAE, Germany, other countries. So the two major trading partners are China and US. European Union. The chair for European Union, she was in India. Modi received him. European Union is looking to increase more and more trade with India. So every country, including Trump, including US, Trump says we are to have a bilateral trade up to $500 billion. They're already 125. They're inching towards 200 billion. But Trump and his members, Modi met from Elon Musk to everyone. He met there. So they want to move it up to $500 billion. India, they see a huge potential there in India. India is the only big country whose GDP is 6.25 or anywhere in between 6 or 7%. Huge population, huge potential, largest importer of arms, liberal democracy. What else does these Western countries need? From European Union to France in particular, to Germany, to US, they all want to Israel, to every single Middle Eastern country, from UAE to Saudi Arabia. 4 countries already have strategic ties. So if there is one country who's benefiting from this entire shake-up the most, of course Russia is also benefiting. That's India, Israel, Russia. These are the countries benefiting. But who are at the receiving end? Russia, China, Israel, India, they're at the benefiting end. And who's at the receiving end after Trump? Canada, Mexico, England, France, Ukraine.
Receiving end of what?
Receiving end of Trump.
Oh, like the negative side?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, that's the whole thing. When we talk about like allies and alienating allies, at some point he's pointing out that our allies should be self-sufficient. Why are they depending so much on us? When your allies at par, like when you compare the euro to USD, it's been at par for quite some time, right? So, but when you look at what you can do with, for example, what you said in India, you still have an educated cheap labor force, right? The trade deficit obviously with China was because it was cheap labor force, and there's that currency exchange. But whereas, Europe should become more self-sufficient. And Canada, that's the conversations we're having here in Canada, and this federal election is going to be all about how to be more self-sufficient. It's about time not to rely so much on the United States. And why should it, right? I mean, because you see that when you're relying so much on a certain country, you can get told the way Zelensky was told in the Oval Office. I mean, what more do you want if that's going to be, do you want to sit in that chair and have the president yell at you because you've taken so much money? And they're saying, hey, we want our money back, and you're saying you have, something else on your mind?
But I want to ask you one question.
What's that?
As much as I totally agree, his intentions are good, and if I was in Joe Biden's advisor or whatever place, I would
Joe Biden?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. So I would have always told him, why are you giving him so much money? But now let's ask a question. When billions of dollars were flowing to Ukraine, who benefited the most?
Well, there's the question of so many are unaccounted
the arms
for.
Company, the arms company.
The arms company, yeah. The arms company is always there. That's always a fact. These are facts of our human history, right? Of how things run. A majority of, when there's a recession, when there's a war, it comes back up. It's what we've seen. And also, why are you going into war? It's usually about critical minerals. What was the Iraq war about? What was the Afghanistan war about? It's about critical minerals. It's about energy. That's what it is. It's usually, when you are in school and the bully, beats up the kid and takes his lunch money, right? Whereas when you are head of a nation and you say, hey, we want to beat up and take a lunch money, you come up with other reasons like religion, ideology, that. Those are always usually used to be able to go into a country and occupy land and have access to minerals and oil. And that's what we've seen. But what was your question about? You were talking about, you said you had a question for me.
Yeah, well, my question was that yes, as much as I don't want to take away the fact that yes, President Zelensky should have acted more responsibly and the buck stops with him. That's fine.
Well, at the White House or in general?
In general,
right.
In general as well, and at White House as well, both the places. Yeah, of course he should have done that because he should have known better what are the consequences of picking up a war with Russia. Though I'll still say that the aggressor here is Russia. I would say that, although most of the Indian media would disagree. Most of the Indian media, they're saying Russia is great because India has an alliance with Russia. They're pro-Modi. Modi has a great relationship with Putin. So when I read papers in the West media would put the blame on Russia. When I read papers or media, when I read everything in India, most of the Indian media say, oh, Russia is great, it's all Zelensky's fault, he should have known better. Yes, I agree. But the aggressor here is Russia.
So why hasn't a country like the United States gone directly into war with Russia? Why hasn't other countries, like first world nations, gone directly into war with Russia? Why?
I'll tell you why. Very good question. That's a very good question. Okay, here it is.
With Putin. With President Putin, specifically.
I'll tell you why. 1991, when USSR disintegrated, Ukraine was the second largest country and Ukraine had its own share of nuclear weapons. What did Ukraine choose? They chose peace. The only country on this planet which has been bombed by a nuclear weapon is Japan, and Japan never pursued nuclear technology for weapons. Japan said, no, we are for peace. That's exactly what Ukraine did. They said, no, we don't want our share. This is your share, take it. And today, if Ukraine had that share, Ukraine would have been third largest country in terms of nuclear weapons. But they said, no, we don't want our nuclear weapons. You can keep it. Or some of those nuclear weapons were actually used towards, the nuclear energy was used towards producing electricity. And actually Boston and many cities in US that nuclear facilities or those areas are now producing electricity for US, for Ukraine, and for many other countries. So here is Ukraine. Why is US not going to war with Russia directly? Because Russia is a nuclear power. The day you start a war, you're risking a nuclear war.
So why did Ukraine think it could do it?
Ukraine didn't do it. It was Russia who invaded.
No, but when
it was Russia who invaded Ukraine.
But when the red line is that if you're a border country to Russia and therefore you cannot join NATO unless you want Russia to go into war with Russia, that's what's been understood, right?
Your point is right, but the question for Ukrainian was for survival. The Ukrainians
are they surviving now? Are they surviving?
But they never.
There's economy. And building your economy to a destruction of a country.
You're right.
It was very predictable. You go and you want to join NATO, Russia's going to have a problem with you because you're sharing a border with Russia.
But
that was always going to be the case.
That is why the 2019 agreement was done. The 2019 agreement was this one that yes, okay, fine, you've taken Crimea, that's yours now. Though it was Ukraine's part. But you've taken over Crimea. You're already supporting insurgents against Ukraine in Donbas area. So you already have, done so much in Donbas. You've taken Ukraine area. Fine, right? You've done a lot of stuff in the northeastern area as well. Even in the southeastern area as well. Fine, whatever is fine. Here we call it a ceasefire. Everything is over. You will not come against us. Fine, everything was done. But then Ukraine was saying all this time that Ukrainians it's a choice of Ukrainians. Ukraine is a free country.
Yeah, but that was the agreement they signed.
No, but they never said this. We won't join NATO. And
it's understood. It's not a surprise.
No.
If I go, for example, if I go up to somebody, I'm 5'3", okay? If I go up to somebody who's 7 feet tall, who weighs 500 times more than I do, and I give them a big punch, am I going to be surprised if they punch me back? Or if I don't even punch them, I go and threaten them verbally, am I going to be surprised if I get hit?
Okay, the dilemma with Ukraine was, you're right. I mean, your question
it was very predictable of what would have happened if you tried to join NATO.
Yeah,
this was not news. This wasn't like, oh, what is this? I thought you wanted me to. Oh, you don't want me to? And I don't mean to make it into a joke, but there was no surprise.
Yeah, it didn't.
It's very predictable.
It didn't come as a surprise to Ukraine. You're right on that part, but the point being, Ukraine had difficult choices to make. I mean, they never thought they never thought that Russia would really. Yeah, they thought they could attack, but they thought maybe we could have our discussions, we could get away, because they didn't have much of a choice on that side either.
That's where I disagree. They thought that they could come to some terms when Russian troops came to the border. They were there for how many weeks?
Not even weeks.
Months, right?
Months, yeah.
They were there, and they thought that, and that's why when the people said of Ukraine, they said, we didn't think they were going to cross the border. Our government didn't tell us to exit. So here's President Zelensky again.
Sorry. You're right. Again,
I remember watching that in the news.
Yeah, but then who told? Although I agree, I know what you'll say on this point. The point that I want to make, that yes, it was Zelensky, and I agree it was Zelensky's responsibility.
No warning.
But US told Ukraine to back out of the war talks, and he shouldn't have done that.
So there's having a brain and making. Your mind in your own brain and using your brain to see, am I going to touch the stove while it's on and get burned? Oh no, my friend here says I should touch it.
Touch it, yeah.
And it's going to be fine.
I've already said
right?
that.
So during COVID, we got those alerts on our phone, right? Stay home order, right? Mm-hmm. If somebody goes missing or something happens, we get this alert. Because we expect our government to tell us, give us a warning. Same thing happens with evacuations, mass evacuations. Your government, when there's a tornado, the government says evacuate. Do not go XYZ. The people of Ukraine did not get any warning. They saw the troops at the border for months, and their government didn't say evacuate, come up with a plan, grab your belongings. You're going to be refugees. We're going to go into war. And it was like, what happened? That's what happened. Like the level of surprise. So the buck stops at the leader of the country. When you provoke a country that's got nuclear weapons that U.S. won't go into war with, nobody goes to war. Who's gone to war with Russia? Nobody goes to war with Russia. And you know the stipulation is that you cannot join NATO because you share a border. What are you thinking?
Yeah, Russia was right.
Thinking?
Yeah, Russia was right.
I'm not saying this is right. These are the rules. This is what has been dictated. I mean, not rules, but this is the situation. I don't mean to say rules. This is the situation.
Unwritten rule.
Right? And you got to read the situation to make the best decision. And you're coming as a person with ideologies of a nation that is a European Union, that's in NATO, that's going to be a first world nation. Those are great visions. Those are great things to have. But what does it take to get there at the risk of devastating your country? So not only, how far back did Ukraine go as a country now in the last 3 years?
Yeah.
How far has it gone back in GDP, in population, in destruction, in decimating your population, refugees, the level of trauma? Where did it go?
But here's a question.
They've stepped back. How many decades, how many centuries did they just step back?
Yeah. But then here's a question. That was wrong, which US did, that giving away billions of dollars, and then continuously telling, don't do the talks, come back, we'll support you. And you're right, Vladimir Zelensky should have known better as a leader. The buck stops with him. But if you can spend 350 or 400 or 500, including everything, billions of dollars to do this war, how much money would be needed to rebuild? Maybe 50 billion? Max 70, 80 billion. It's not going to touch 100 billion. So now, I think the good thing could be, yes, you're right, that yes, first things first, tell Russia, give some concessions, right? And tell Ukraine, you also have to concede certain things. So the ceasefire is important. Let's stop everything. That's fine. But instead of US telling that, okay, your critical minerals, we're going to take that share, this, that, yes, it was his decision, wrong decision. We all agree on that. He shouldn't have listened to US at that time. But for now, instead of making a deal, squeezing a deal out of a war-torn country who's not even able to rebuild, here's a country. I mean, US, we're talking here $23 trillion economy, 23 trillion, heading towards 25, 30, 50 trillion. There's a country heading towards $50 trillion economy, or at least 25 or 30 trillion dollar in the near future. 35, 50, or even $100 billion. I know it's a huge money, but to rebuild a country, and then US can always say, okay, fine, we would do our part, maybe 10, 20 billion dollar. Canada come up with 2 billion, fine. Saudi Arabia come up with 2 billion. Or yes, fine, we can all rebuild this country. Millions of people have displaced, and they can easily rebuild this country. This is the least, rather than telling this guy, oh, we want a deal there with your critical minerals. We are squeezing a war-torn country. No, we shouldn't be doing that.
But hold on. How is the US supposed to recoup their money?
They never said we're going to take this money back. They spend it over because
But listen, when you
it was the arms companies making millions and billions of dollars. They didn't even have time to,
it's still taxpayer dollars, right? You're accountable. See, when you win elections, like Zelensky won an election, he's accountable to the Ukrainian people. Mm-hmm. And in this case, it's like, oh, we're going to join the European Union, and you campaigned on something. The last time we saw the guy in the UK, what was his name? The prime minister who campaigned on Brexit. Cameron.
David Cameron.
David Cameron. He won the election. He had to go and step down once when he held his referendum, and the referendum was like, yeah, we're going to do it, right? So when you campaign on something and the people believe you, you have to then, you have to deliver. And so don't campaign on things you can't do, first of all, right? Because it's it's another thing, like to mobilize people, to get them rallied up for support. But at the end of it, you also are saying, elected officials are fund managers, right? When they're sitting on the coffers of taxpayer, the dollars, and how they're going to spend it. So any country, and that's why Canada should now be asking, where did our money go? We need it. And so when $350 billion of tax dollars, American tax dollars, leave, America's not in a good situation. It's a big GDP. It's a world superpower. But the average person, when you look at their income in middle America, in different parts of America, outside of, the big cities of like Chicago, New York City, Los Angeles, San Francisco, the average American doesn't have health care. They can't just go to the doctor because they have a stomach pain. It's $1,000 you got to put down. You want to do a blood test? Another $1,000. It's not like the safety nets we have here. If you're an American and you finish high school and you just go to community college and you can't afford to pay, hundreds of thousands of dollars to go to university, you just don't go. So you don't go get your teeth checked. You don't go for your annual checkup. You don't go to university if you can't afford it. This is America. Okay, so for a very wealthy country, the average person, there's wage disparity for men and women. Women are not making the same. They don't have paternity leave. Maternity leave is not a thing. They have still 2 weeks of vacation annually, whereas Europe has 5 weeks, as I worked in Europe. And when I saw my contract for 5 weeks of vacation, I was like, oh, I didn't know this is a thing. And then it adds up the more years you work. So we're talking about a country that needs so much of their own money invested back into their own country. So it's not about going to a war-torn country and saying, hey, we've been paying for a war that doesn't look like it's going to end. And that was the last administration. And I campaigned to my people that we're going to make America great again, meaning you're going to be able to afford to live, right? So here, Canada says, I can't pay my rent or I can't buy a house. Canada's not saying, yeah, it may say I don't have a family doctor, but it doesn't say I don't have access to health care. We don't say we don't have access. They don't have access to health care unless they have insurance. And then, of course, there's the safety net of people who can't afford insurance and how they go. Like, they show up to a hospital and they don't have insurance. We show up to a hospital, we complain about waiting. I'm not saying we shouldn't complain about waiting, but nobody refuses health care for us. If here, we have access to education that's subsidized. So I can go to university or I can go to college. It costs a fraction of the price compared to going to an American university because it's subsidized. We have access to so much more here. So our problems are completely different than the Americans. So for somebody who campaigned on, putting money back into the country, for them to say to a country, oh, you don't look like you want to end a war because you still want to be you still want to join NATO and you still want to be part of the EU and you still want to take down the bad guy, Putin in this case. Why shouldn't they ask for their money? And they're not saying, pay me back now. They're saying, okay, well, you have critical minerals. We need critical minerals. Everybody needs critical minerals. And you kind of owe us. Canada won't annex. Canada doesn't want to be the 51st state to give us their minerals. But, you're on the hook for money. It's not a trade deficit. It's, we gave you some money. We'd need it back. There's nothing wrong with that.
But US gives...
It doesn't feel good when it's a war-torn country, sure.
Yeah. But
that money belongs to the American people.
No, there wasn't any part of the agreement, and there were no strings attached.
It's not an agreement thing. It's you campaign on pulling out of wars and bringing money back home where it belongs. You talk to any American person, they say we need the money back. That's why he got such a massive majority. He campaigned on that.
He campaigned on the ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine, but he never said that, and no one in US is asking that whatever money was spent as an aid or a support to Ukraine, that they want
they
their money
want
back.
the money back into the country. Yeah,
and then there is
Ukraine is one of them.
Yeah, and then there is another point regarding the Brexit. Yeah, you're right, and we discussed that at length in a previous editor's take. That yes, David Cameron had to step down because he campaigned on Brexit. He had and he had to step down, but having the luxury of looking things in the hindsight, was that the right decision? That for David Cameron, absolutely right. 3 reasons for that. First of all, the last 10, 11 years, they've never come out of the turmoil. Majority of the British surveys after surveys, they said it was wrong on us. David Cameron was right, though he had to step down. But David Cameron was right. Surveys after surveys, they told him, look, here we are. The economic situation hasn't improved. So Brexit was a wrong decision. Third point, from Boris Johnson to Theresa May to Liz Truss to Rishi Sunak. Now, we don't know what the current situation would be. None of the prime minister were able to, bring Britain out of the Brexit situation. And we all know Trump. He said, "I'm your Brexit guy here." So because he also championed the cause of Brexit. He did that, right? So when he was also championing the cause of Brexit. So, and today the Britishers are saying, "Oh, it was wrong. We shouldn't have done that. It was a wrong decision." So even Trump campaigned the Brexit.
Right. My point of bringing that up was to say, when politicians are going to an election cycle, they should be very careful about what the things they're promising that they're winning on, if they can deliver it or not. But giving mass amounts of money to a country for a war that's been going on for 3 years in a time where inflation is a massive problem worldwide, it's not about, it was a gift, it was, and we don't expect back. Administrations change, and the people who elected Trump want they want their money in their own country. That's what he campaigned on.
But then we have given billions of dollars in aid to so many countries across the globe.
They just cut all the aid. USAID is done.
No, they cut. But are they going to recoup all that money from Afghanistan, from Pakistan?
Well, those are previous wars.
Israel?
We're talking about ongoing wars right now.
Israel is an ongoing
war.
Well,
that's going to be very interesting to see. Well, he was saying that the rebuilding of Gaza, and that's a whole nother episode on its own, and now Egypt's come to the table, and Saudi, and how they're going to fund that entire thing. So he's also positioned it, he threw a wrench in there, and all of a sudden everybody's putting their money where their mouth is in terms of what they want. But my point is this, that my point isn't, I have a lot of sympathy for what's happened to Ukraine. And I'm not a pro-Russia or anti, it's none of that. My whole point in today's conversation is when you're leader of a country, you are responsible to your electorate. The citizens who elected you, their tax dollars that you take, and how you're going to spend it. And that is your number one priority. And when that's the rule. That's your number one priority. So you're responsible to the people who elected you because you're asking them for their vote every 4 years, and you're asking for your party's votes, and you're also taking their money. They've elected you as the board of directors on the money, because you don't ask them permission for how to spend the money as you do in the 4 years, right, term. So that's what I'm saying. That a leader should have the vision of what are they doing for their country. And in this case, unfortunately, in Ukraine's case, it's a country that's been devastated.
Yeah, I'll sum up on this one. Just 2 points once again, and I'll rest my case here. These alliances, it's not about Ukraine. I'm talking about the bigger picture here. Ukraine is definitely an important piece of the puzzle. For US, where does US see itself in 5 years from now, 10 years, 15, 20, 30, 50 years from now? There's a rise of China, and then there's India rising as well. And the hegemony that or the influence that US enjoyed. The US is still the global superpower, first in terms of economy, second in terms of military power. So I don't think so there is any challenge to US as we speak. Yes, there is challenge, but US is way ahead in every aspect, in economy, and being a military superpower. But in terms of influence that US has enjoyed for quite a few years, being the single superpower, because China was just getting there. 1991, USSR disintegrated, and after that in 90s, US is the single superpower. Then from 2000 till 2010, China was getting there. China started organizing, the Olympics, the Beijing Olympics in 2008. I still remember, Bush making a remark on China. Will you be able to do Olympics? They said, of course, yes. And China today, the way it's flexing its muscle, and we all know it's for a fact that in 25, 30 years, China will be the number one economy. There's no way India can touch China, or any other country can even come close to China, and US and India will be distant second or third. By the time China reaches 50 trillion or 55 trillion, in another 20, 30 years, US and India will be 41, 42, in between 41 to 45, both of them. Second or third, we don't know. 99% of projections say this. There won't be any other country who will be even $20 trillion. So these will be the three countries. Every single projection shows this. So there won't be any other country even 25 trillion. They'll all be 20 trillion or less of an economies. And here you have clearly three countries way ahead. Number one, China. Then you have US and India. So, and if you have that sort of economy, you have the luxury of spending more. Like China, look at China. Did it spend $300 billion 20 years ago? Absolutely not. India now has become the largest importer of weapons. Was this a position 20 years ago? No. The reforms unleashed in 90s. We've seen China, this has nothing short of a miracle. Just in 30 years, China has reached where it is right now. There are other countries growing at a very rapid pace, strengthening their position at the global level. So it's a question, where does US see itself in 5 years, 10 years, 15, 20, and 50 years? Why I'm saying this? It's a very important thing to understand. These alliances were built in decades. They weren't built overnight. The alliance that Canada and US has, it's more than a century of an alliance. We should think, before really talking to our ally, because we're losing influence, that's for sure. US is losing influence at a very rapid pace. I'll talk about the financial aspect and economy in a minute from now. US has lost its influence over China. There was a time when US supported China. China didn't grow because of just, SEZs, we created SEZ, small economic zones, we did this. Fine, you did all that. But it was with US support that you grew at this level. Now it has become, a competition. They're both rivals now. Today, when Macron, look at France. France, they disagree with US with so many things. Now we are pushing them to the level that they're saying, can we really rely on US? Do we trust US? And Canada and all these European countries have started thinking like that. US wanted, what did US want from India? Stop your dealing with Russia, move in our zone, and be our close strategic ally.
US wanted from whom?
India.
Okay.
Be our strategic ally. Now, all the more reason for India to think that if European allies and Canada as an ally, they are at the receiving end. When I say receiving end, the threats and all those things, at the receiving end of US today, India will think again. And there are many columnists who have seen that India will be more aligning with US and it will leave Russia. I doubt now with the current situation right now, because India will think twice before completely abandoning Russia and moving to the US side. Though it's but natural. India and US the relationships are going to go stronger and stronger. There is a personal strong chemistry between Trump and Modi. We've seen that many times before as well. We've seen that in this tour as well. There was a reason one of the first days Marco Rubio met was his counterpart. The U.S. Secretary of State was S. Jaishankar in U.S. the first day of business, and he meets 2 or 3 important guys, and he met S. Jaishankar. Modi was invited here. He comes here, and I think they're going to meet again. There's a Quad summit happening. So the point being, U.S. has to see these alliances which are built over a period of time. Am I shaking up these alliances? Is it going to be good, or what am I going to get out of it? And finally, on the economic front as well, as much as I totally agree, I'm for it, that yes, the mandate for any US president, not for Trump, any US president or for any leader is to take care of their own people. And I totally agree there has been a lot of waste, a lot of inefficiency. The productivity is on the low in US. There are challenges in US. There's a lot of deficit, debt piling up. But US has been the reserve currency. US dollar has been the reserve currency. Will that strength go away? So all these things US has to weigh in. Maybe, but I think the shake-up, unless Trump agrees that, okay, fine, I was just trying to push and get a deal, fine, good, that's a good way. But in case you don't get too many deals and your allies get skeptical that whether we can rely on US, the alliances that were built, the reason why India and China cannot work together was the reason. There's a trust deficit. They have fought wars. Despite so many good things happening, one of the largest trading partners today, China has always been number 1, number 2, number 1, number 2. Trade deficit is heavily skewed towards China. China is benefiting, but still there is trade deficit. There is trust deficit. So US, I doubt US would want to afford a trust deficit with its strong allies. I couldn't think a couple of years ago, and I didn't like it, honestly. I didn't like it when US national anthem was being played here, hockey came and it was booed. No, I said absolutely not. US is our ally. We heavily rely on US. That's the national.
Again, we heavily rely on US.
Yeah.
US doesn't heavily rely on us. Yeah. That's the problem.
That is a problem, but I'm talking from US perspective now. Canada has a problem, but I'm talking from US perspective. When the national anthem was played, no, we should stand up. We should respect that. No, we cannot do. But we are pushing all those buttons from US. Your final comments, and then we'll.
Yeah. So those are great things you said. Okay. So my point on when you said about the money that was given to Ukraine, there was no stipulation that money should have been received. Okay, that was the past. That was complacency. That was mismanagement, right? And that's not just for Ukraine. Just anytime money was going somewhere to fund a war, or anything that wasn't to fund when your people are suffering from a very dire situation. That's why the Democratic Party collapsed. The Democratic Party has collapsed. The Republican Party in this past election, not only did it get the electoral votes, it also got the popular votes. The Democratic Party has turned into the Liberal Party of Ontario that has had to go figure out what their identity is and where they belong. Why is that? Why would traditional Democratic voters like the Hispanics and the Black community go out in massive force and support Trump? Because they were tired of complacency. That when you give money away and there's no accountability of how it's going to come back, first of all, why are you giving it away? Second of all, what's the strategy of getting it back? This is what we're seeing right now. So they elected this president, and this president is doing what he said he was going to do. So you can't say, but in the previous administration didn't do it. Well, that was bad. That was bad decisions. That was bad decisions. And when it comes to where is U.S. going to go, okay, your allies are relying on you. Do you want to have a bunch of friends who just rely on you and that's why they're your friends? You call them allies? No, seriously, your allies should be self-sufficient.
It doesn't work in their favor, it does work to my advantage. Sorry, go ahead.
The person who's funding them, right? Yeah. It works to your advantage because you can call them to come, they'll come. You can tell them to go, they'll go. You can tell them to dance, they'll dance. You can tell them to sit, they'll sit. You'll tell them to jump, they'll jump. Yeah. That's what he's doing. Why do you think so many world leaders are getting on a plane and getting to Washington, D.C. and sitting on that yellow chair in the Oval Office and doing all this stuff? Is because he says dance, they dance. He says come, they come. Yeah. He says you want a deal, they say yes.
Here's an invitation from the king for a visit. The British Prime Minister, he's again invited.
Canada hasn't even had a chance to go.
And I doubt they will.
Exactly. right? So Canada hasn't even gone. Mexico hasn't even gone. And all the other world leaders who have substantial, say in their region have shown up so far. Why? Right? Because when your allies depend on you, then you can do that. Now, so the mistrust, the trust deficit, right, on ideology. Well, this is a president who is going to make transactional deals. If your ideologies align or they don't align, it doesn't matter, right? Because the people of that country, I know Democrats who voted Republican in this election because they were saying we cannot go through another 4 years of the devastation. Financially, when you get financially hit, you stop talking about 26 genders. You do. When you financially get hit, all of a sudden, you don't care about what species is going to be extinct if I do something on economic. You stop thinking about, is there going to be bike lanes because we need to have, but you stop talking about those things if you can't eat and if you're starving. Because what is it equivalent to when you're starving, you can't eat? It's equivalent to being in like a war where you don't have your basic needs met. So when you don't have your basic needs met and there's no level of predictability where your country's going, and if you're going to be able to, people want to prosper. We're not even talking about prospering. We're talking about staying steady. Surviving. Can I just survive? So when you're at that level, you're not going to talk about any of this other stuff that we used to talk about on the airwaves. Is it right? It was all ideology. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with ideology, but ideology gets you someplace, okay? It gets you to, vision, and perhaps you can get to it. But you need to have your basic necessities met. And this president was voted in because the basic necessities were not being met in America. I know we're talking about a superpower and GDP, but I'm talking about the average American. And if you doubt it, go see how they live. Go see their infrastructure. Go see their schools. Go see how it all looks. I've never seen the places I drove through. I've never seen anything like it. And I didn't even go into bad areas. I was just on a route. So when I drove through the country is what I'm referring to. So what is he doing? So what he's doing is, as he puts on the tariffs or the threat of tariffs, that is creating a negotiation power. So right now he doubled up the 10% on China to 20%, right, effective a few days ago. Why is that? Because then he has leverage on Panama Canal. The Panama Canal is heavily influenced by China. They built the bridges there. The Chinese companies are there. They have a lot of control in the Panama, and the Panama Canal is important because it's the trade route to the Atlantic and Asia. And then Greenland. Why is Trump talking about Greenland? It's because of all the Chinese company put in. They own 12.5% of the mineral company in Greenland. They put in bids to build their airports. They put in bids to build infrastructure. That's what China's been doing in the past decades, is they go into countries that cannot afford to build infrastructure. They build it. When they default on it, now they have leverage. So why do you think the U.S. is putting the tariffs on there? Because what they're doing is they're starting the negotiation talks. He's using tariffs to start the negotiation talks, to bring you to the table. And he thought he was going to do that with President Zelensky with the minerals deal to bring him to the table. Unfortunately, he showed up this way. He got booted. He didn't even get lunch, right? And nothing happened. And then he's in a bad situation right now. So now he's made an example of President Zelensky. We saw that as an example. Okay, if there's tariff that's being put there, it's only an invitation to come to the table, because that's what he did, right? He proposed 25% tariffs on Canada. Canada went in through, here's $1.3 billion at the border. Now, is it really fentanyl? Is it really border crossings? Or is it just something to say right now because it wants to bring you to the table? That's the thing. We have to think about what are the levels of plans that he has in mind. So with the Panama Canal, with Greenland, these are all heavily influenced China. China's right in there, and that's critical for the Arctic. That's critical for trade. That's gonna and also China has had the share of like minerals in terms of as being the superpower in that sense. America wants to catch up. So as America does that, brings them all to the table, stops others from advancing, like China in this situation, and now by bringing Russia back into the table to have peace talks and saying they should join the G8, blah, 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 what are they doing? They are creating a rift between China and Russia and their relationships there, because what U.S. can do for Russia, China hasn't been able to do. So if they can isolate China and Russia by saying, okay, Russia will bring you back to the table to some degree, which they already have, and what they did with President Zelensky at that Oval Office, who do you think enjoyed that the most? Obviously, Putin enjoyed that entire thing the most. Everybody else has been shocked, obviously. So everything is very strategic if you look at it, how they've positioned the whole thing. Everybody thinks the conversation, the red ticker, the breaking news is the real game. No, that's not even like the pregame. That's not the pregame. That's just to say what's happening, just to tune in, get your attention, because the real game is yet to come. So when that's like in Canada, fentanyl. What is this, like less than 1% fentanyl crossing the border?
0.2%.
0.2%. Yeah, less than 1%. So
now he's changing the goalpost. Now he's saying it's just 1% because that's what you're catching of the total.
So it's not about taking it for face value and saying this is what he wants. No, this is just not even the appetizer to what they have in mind, and that's why you got to be a little bit more. And in what world did you think you could rely on a country so much? Oh, take our exports. We don't need to have interprovincial trade. I'm talking about Canada. Mm-hmm. In Ontario, I don't need to trade with BC because I trade with you. It's complacency. So guess what? They have all of that to flex. Now, can they get to a point where there's going to be a trust deficit? Sure, there's a trust deficit. Is it going to stop us from wanting to sell to them? Absolutely not. So what does that do for their economy? If they are now bringing back in jobs and they're bringing back companies to invest, like Apple just announced $500 billion investment in the United States. Apple has been manufacturing their phones in China. Apple has not been manufacturing any of their phones in the United States. Apple, it's an American company. They're doing they just announced a few days ago, $500 billion investment into the United States, creating jobs. You had the $500 billion AI. You had you're hearing all the American companies wanting to go back home. What does that do? That creates jobs. That creates, when you have jobs, you now have purchase power. Now you have even a stronger economy. And still, Europe and the rest of the world will still look at America and say, how can we sell to Americans? Because they have the money. Their currencies has value, and they have the money, and they have industry. How do we get in there? And that's what he's doing. So at the risk of upsetting allies who depend on you, he's building an economy that your allies, non-allies, people who trust you, distrust you, still want to sell to you and still need to have a relationship with you.
Yeah, I think I wish we had more time, but very interesting discussion. Let's see how it goes, but I think we'll carry on this discussion, hopefully in our following weeks. And this is Ymedia podcast that you were just watching. Once again, we'd like to thank our audience for joining us at Ymedia podcast. We will carry on discussing our current issues right here at Ymedia podcast. But Ramona ji, always a pleasure listening to you.
Always a pleasure.
I think we covered so much today. Just as Trump has touched or shaken up the entire geopolitics, I think we also touched and shook up quite a few things today. But thank you so much, Ramona ji, and I hope you have enjoyed our today's podcast. Stay tuned with Ymedia. We will be covering in our podcast Ymedia Political Sensex, Ymedia Foreign Policy in the coming time. Stay tuned with Ymedia. Thank you.